What is up, folks? Today I have a guest on the show in perfect 2020 fashion. I had a FaceTime session with good friend and professional sound mixer David Dadon. David's been working sound in the film industry since 2011, and I first met him on a commercial that I was the lead actor on, and he was the sound mixer, and David and I have been working on various projects ever since. And he's actually the guy that introduced me to the Olympia folding cart that I did a review on back in the early days. So I recently picked up the Sound Devices Mix Pre 3 to help out the audio here on the channel, but also because I was especially keen on its size and its ability to fit perfectly up underneath the red Komodo. And this right here is a fantastic combo for corporate talking heads or documentary interviews. And for those that don't know, the Mix Pre's are especially popular for their cashmere preamps, excellent built-in limiters, and their ability to jam timecode. In fact, this video right here, right now, is being recorded with the Sound Devices Mix Pre 3 and the red Komodo. Now, me being primarily a camera guy, I was especially excited to learn that David owns the bigger brother to the Mix Pre 3, which is the Mix Pre 10T. And luckily for all of us, David agreed to give us a rundown on his settings and workflow with the Sound Devices Mix Pre's because they're all very similar. Now, please keep in mind, this session was done via FaceTime. However, David is a sound guy, so you know he recorded his own high-quality audio. And if you're someone like me, a dummy when it comes to audio, then this content is pretty beneficial. So, David, I have the Mix Pre 3 here. It's underneath the Komodo, and I just thought it'd be a great, COVID way for you to walk me through this as like, me, I don't know anything about this mixer. I don't really focus much on audio, so I think it would be great to get your professional advice on how to set this up for a way, just for me to get some solid audio for talking heads.
Cool, let's do it. So right now I have channel 3 hooked up. That's channel 3 of my Electrosonics to a lavalier right here. That's hooked up right here. What you're seeing is the stereo mix, that's your left and right, and you're seeing your individual channel. You have your knob here. This is channel 3. To go into the settings, just simply click in. You want to do this before you start always. Click in. You're going to see 20 decibels. I like to keep mine at 20 decibels for lavs because I have my gain set on my transmitter and my receiver so that I have a nice healthy signal. As you can see right here, I'm talking right into the lav. My individual track is at 20 decibels. That's a very, very safe range. So if you go back to the mix window, your gain is right here. So if I were to decide to pump up that gain, you're going to see a major difference here. You see how I'm clipping here? You want to make sure that this is healthy and this isn't going orange. So let's go ahead and go back to 20. We're not clipping here and we're not clipping here. So you can always set your stereo mix to be higher if they're a soft talker or lower if they're a loud talker. That way you have two sources of audio. You have your original track and you have your stereo track. And when you print that out, you're going to see your left as track 1, your right as track 2, and your lav or your boom or whatever you have here as the next track in accordance like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if you have the Mix Pre 3, I think it goes up to 6 or something like that.
So for instance on mine, right? Like if I go in here and I just, like what you did, you tapped the number 3 there, right? And that brings you into the track 3. So walk me through what would be like the best kind of starter settings for like a talking head scenario and not having to, like if it's a nice isolated room, like what would be some very basic settings that would hopefully just be like a good all-arounder?
Some basic absolute musts are you need to make sure your track is armed. Arm needs to be on red. That means that it's armed to record. And if you were to go to track 8, you'd see arm is disabled because nothing is there. When you go to track 3, arm is there. The way you see if it's armed or not is within the track or on the bottom. If your numbers are not red, you're not recording anything. Low cut, I highly recommend you stay at 80 hertz. That's going to take any unwanted lows that you're hearing, possible air conditioning, cars driving by that you may not hear but are in the recording. Those types of things are like typically if you're doing sound by yourself, you're really concentrated on your camera, like if you're doing a one-man thing, you're doing a corporate shoot, something like that, you don't have a sound guy there to sit there and pay attention to every airplane that passes or every car or bus. This is going to help you a lot. having 80 hertz. And if, they're a high talker, something like that, you can even go up to 120 hertz. That's not going to cut much out. That's kind of like the beef in like a good kick drum. So like you're not losing any dialogue if you do that. You'll just notice that there are less interruptions from the street. Your gain, as I said, I like to stay around 20 decibels, but rule of thumb is if it sounds good, it is good. So if you have a little bit different parameters, don't pain yourself too much over it, so long as you have these healthy levels.
So I was going to ask you about that when you said healthy levels. So when you're watching it on what you're looking at right there, what is a healthy level on there? Like where is a good place for that to hit?
So if you can see where my voice goes,
Yep.
it likes to hang around -20. So anywhere between -30 and -12 consistently is a healthy range. That means that when you get into the mix and you're, inside your DAW and you want to add some plugins, you want to add your compressors, you want to add some, some beef to your mix, you want to, bring stuff up to a commercial level or a film level where you're going to need this to compete with the next, if it's a commercial, you're going to want it to be just as loud as the TV show that's going to be on after the commercial, those types of things. So you're going to want a little bit of headroom here so that you can do that later. If you have a mix hitting like this, then they're not going to be able to do anything with it once you mix it. So make sure here you're not clipping too hard. Make sure here you're not clipping too hard. Between -30 and -12 is good. -24, -12 is nice. And another thing I highly recommend, especially on the MixPre, one of the best things I think about it, besides the preamps, which are great, the Cashmere preamps, one of the best features that I love are the limiters. The limiters are going to keep your signal from clipping, and they're going to do it in a really smooth, transparent way. So sometimes limiters can be a little bit offensive if you're using them in your DAW or your editing software, but on the MixPre, they are excellent. Limiters are your best friends on here. That is the limiter. The orange here, check, 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 check. So you can see that when that happens, it's not going to be distorted and it's going to keep the signal clear. So that's kind of your best friend there. That means that if you're not able to look at your MixPre the whole recording, you have limiters on there. You don't have to be afraid that they got too loud.
You see that little bar? What is that? It's like ahead of your levels. What is that?
Okay, that's showing you basically where your signal, imagine if there's like an imaginary ceiling on top of your signal. So you can see it green when it's down here. You can see it yellow when it's over here, and you can see it red when it's a little bit higher. That's kind of showing you that there is like that much headroom on your mix. So I like to pretend that those meters are kind of where my meters are, because when this is happening, it's pushing the ceiling as your dialogue gets louder. So I kind of use as a rule of thumb that if these two marks right here get to around this area, you're too loud. That means that, if you bring your signal up later, it's going to have the ability to distort, like you're going to want to pretend like those marks are part of your meter, because they really are. They're kind of pushing the ceiling of where your sound is.
Okay, Dave, so that is awesome information. Can we dive back into the menu for the actual mic, and I want you to explain the pan thing.
Sure. So when you're in the menu and you get to pan, typically I'll keep my pan center. The only time I change my pan, with dialogue, is really if you want to hear it differently. Like let's say you want to hear the boom mic in your left ear and you want to hear the lavalier in your right ear because you're monitoring it by yourself and you don't know which one sounds like which. You can change to put the lav to your right, and you can change to put your, let's say boom is on 2 in this instance. You can make that go to the left. If you're sending it to a client, I highly recommend you solo your tracks to hear them. That means I'm only hearing my boom, which in this case I labeled boom backup.
So when you tap that solo button, that's still recording all the other mics, right?
Yes.
Okay.
If you're in solo, you're just listening to just that track. When you unclick solo, you're listening to the whole mix.
Okay, got you.
So just because solo is on, here, watch. We'll go to 3. We'll click solo. Now that's going to be flashing. That's your solo track. So if you had all these other ones lit up, let's just say I'm soloing track 2. You can see that track 2 is soloed because it's blinking, but track 3 is still functioning, you know?
Yeah.
So that's to make sure, like, okay, I hear something funny. Where is it coming from? It must be coming from this track. Let me solo it. Oh, it's not that track. Let me solo this track, and it's going to change to track 3. That way you can kind of go through, and I like to just double check while I'm recording, what do each of these tracks sound like right now? And are each of these tracks usable? If not, do I need to adjust my microphone? Do I need to adjust the lav? Did the lav fall on the client? Those types of things allow you to pinpoint problems or pinpoint areas to improve.
Okay, so then now while we're on this screen here, I noticed that you have it set to 48K and 24-bit. Is that pretty standard?
Yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely always keep that on 48K, 24-bit. You can also change that by tapping it. You'll see the date and the time, and you can toggle back. This, if I had an SD card in, you would be able to see how much time we have on the SD card right here.
I noticed. Where did you go to label your tracks? Because you had one track labeled Boom Backup. Where do you do that at?
So you can do that within the menu. I highly recommend that everybody who has a MixPre download Wingman app, and if you have an iPad, you can do it on there as well. What I do is I set up an iPad on a mount right here. That way I can see all my levels, and I can label them accordingly with the iPad or with your phone. If you wanted to change it within, you'd have to go into your menu here. So like you can edit the scene and whatnot, but in your edit window within the app, you'll see a name on each of them.
And you can just tap it.
Yeah. You can also click record from your app, which is really cool.
Okay, what I want to do now that you're on that, number 3, the main lav on the LCD screen there. So let's tap into part 2 of that menu, because I want to ask you some questions about the second half of that menu.
Okay, so delay would be if you are using, these are analog receivers. Some digital receivers like Deity and some other brands, sometimes they have a millisecond delay on the signal. So if you have a digital wireless application, sometimes they will tell you in the manual, this has a 14 millisecond delay. That means that you're going to receive the signal, and sometimes on Sennheisers and stuff like that, you're going to receive the signal 14 milliseconds after they say it. So you might notice that your lav is not syncing with your boom. Your boom sounds like it has an echo because their voice is basically coming in 14 milliseconds after on the lav. You're going to want to go to that individual track. First off, you should definitely always read the manual so that you'll know if something like that is going to happen, and not while you're on set in front of a client. So you're going to want to go to, because it's happened to me before.
For sure.
That's why I read all my manuals. So you would go here and you would set it to the millisecond that it says in the manual. So 14 milliseconds, and you can tweak that back and forth, but in the manual, it will definitely tell you. So input is mic. If you're going to be doing line application, that's typically like, if you're running an instrument, things like that. Phase is technically like if you had two of a similar microphone in a similar place, you may hear a little bit of an issue if you're recording the same signal twice. It might kind of sound funny. And what you'll want to do is invert the phase of one of the microphones. What that does is just changes up the phase of one track so that it's basically the opposite. So now when you're recording two things right next to each other, they won't like coincide. The signals won't bother each other. They'll be able to sit harmoniously in the mix.
If I ever wanted to run this directly into my camera, what would be where do I set the levels on my camera?
So if you are sending your signal to your red, for instance, you're going to want to see the signal the same here. So all the gain that you need, you should get from your transmitter, your receiver, and your mixer or your recorder. when you're sending this to your camera, it's really important to make sure that everything here is healthy first. Once it's in your camera, you shouldn't have to add too much more gain to make it look just like this in your camera. That way you're hearing just the preamps you purchased. Like these have really good preamps, these Cashmere preamps, and you want to hear the color and tone of them. If you put it into your camera and you crank the gain up in your camera, you're going to be adding a preamp with extra gain. You're going to be adding more noise. So in order to have it transparent and sound silky smooth like the Sound Devices preamps, you're not going to want to add gain in your camera. Add the gain in your mix pre. When you want to control that too, you can go to Outputs. You can go to X1 and X2, and you can control the gain here.
So on mine, I can only do, it has stereo out mute, stereo out gain, and then stereo out left and right. So I guess my question to you would be, what should I set my stereo out gain to? Is that just dependent on matching, make sure the levels on the Komodo match the levels on the mix pre?
Exactly. So you would want to have your Komodo right next to your mixer and just tap up or down on gain until it looks the exact same as it does on your mixer, and that should be good. So you're gonna find most of your audio issues with gain staging. Always look at the first source, second source, and third source of your gain, because you can turn up your signal on your transmitter, you can turn up your signal on your receiver, and you can turn up your signal on your gain on your recorder. Then you can turn it up on the fader for your stereo mix. You don't want to do all your gain in the recorder. You want to do a little bit in the transmitter, a little bit in the receiver, a little bit in your mix pre.
Yeah, that's excellent, man. I think that's great, bro. Okay, dude, I think that'll wrap it up for us, man. That was really excellent. All right, well, I'm looking forward to working with you again soon, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully I'll see you on set soon.
So there you have it, folks. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to David for helping us all out. And I do want to mention the battery life of the Mix Pre 3. It is pretty power hungry. Just to give you an example here, I was using a USB power brick because you can power it via USB-C, and I just had a little power brick from Best Buy, and during the little session with David, you saw the Mix Pre was on the entire time, and within an hour it burnt through that entire brick. Now just to give you some context, that same brick, when I used to use it with the Tascam DR60D Mark II, would last like weeks, and the Mix Pre killed it in 1 hour. And to give you a little bit more context, during the setup of this interview right here, I put in 4 brand new AA batteries, because it also runs off of 4 AA's, right out of the box, brand new, out of the box directly into the Mix Pre, turned it on during the setup, never hit record. It wasn't recording during the setup, obviously, but when I went to hit record, by the time I was set up, the Mix Pre was giving me a message letting me know it had to shut down because the batteries were too low. So it is very, very power hungry, so do keep that in mind. Again, if you have an external battery like a gold mount or a V mount, that is the way to go, but just keep in mind it's going to pull juice from that pretty hardcore. So as always, I want to thank you all for stopping by. If you're new here, I encourage you to tap that subscribe button. And if you're interested in what it's like to be a startup DIY indie filmmaker in Los Angeles, then the Dog Times Patreon is the place to be. As always, there'll be links down below, and I hope to see you in the next one.